Hello and welcome back everybody, and as promised we will just show the amazing games that played in Norway Chess 2024. This is round 3 of the tournament and we are having Fabiano Caruana, the number 1 US chess player, facing off the world chess champion right now, who is Deng Liren from China. So we get pawn to e4 from Fabiano, we get pawn to e5, classic knight to f3, attacking the pawn, knight to c6, defending the pawn, and now we get bishop to c4, which is the Italian game, and now we get knight to f6, which is the two knights defense. There is knight to g5, which is called the fried liver. Hikaru used it as a weapon from 2 or 3 years to beat Fabiano, but right now Fabiano just plays pawn to d3, and now we get bishop to c5, Ding Liren, which is the Gucci piano variation. We get castles from Fabiano, castles from Ding, and now knight b to d2 from Fabiano, pawn to d6 from black, defending the pawn on e5. And you may think this game is going okay, it is quiet and it is the Italian game, it should be a quiet game and slow positional long-term play, but believe me, it won't go as the way you are thinking. We get pawn to c3 from white. Usually white's trying to play b4 and a4 and extend on the queen side, so we get pawn to a5 from Ding to stop the pawn from moving forward. We get pawn to h3 from Fabiano, trying to stop bishop to g4 to pin the knight on f3 to the queen on d1. So we get pawn to h6 also from black, and now we get rook to e1, which is the standard maneuver of the Gucci piano and the Roy Lopez. Usually this knight is trying to go to f1 and to e3 and d5 or f5 later on the game. So we get bishop to e6 and now bishop to b5. Of course, it's not such a good idea to trade the bishop on e6, as this will give a black an open file on the f file which can attack white later on the game. Also, this whole idea with knight to f1, knight to e3 and knight d5 or knight to f5 no longer works because the pawn on e6 is just chilling out there. So we get bishop to b5 from Fabiano, a good move, and now we get queen to b8. Queen to b8 seems weird, but we will see the idea behind it. We get rook to e2, ensuring that the pawn on f2 is defended because it seems like queen to a7 was a threat. We get queen to a7 anyways, and now we get bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and now pawn to a4, fixing that an isolated pawn on a5 for black. This is not such a huge thing or a huge achievement for white, but it is later on the game. We will see that this pawn on a5 may become weakness or may not. We get knight to d7 from black, and now knight to f1, trying to play bishop to e3 and try to recapture with the knight. And maybe later on this knight could go to h4 and this knight will occupy the square on f5. We get pawn to d5 from black, and now we get pawn to d4 from white. Oh, a center explosion. You may not see this all of the time, that the center is all of the things is hitting on the other things. So we get e takes d4 from black, and now knight takes d4 from white. Queen to b6 from black, putting pressure on the pawn on b2 as well as the knight on d4. And now we get bishop to e3, as this rook is defending the pawn, so the bishop is free out to move anywhere. So we get bishop takes d4 and bishop takes d4 from white, and now we get queen to b7. The queen is insisting to put pressure on the pawn on b2. So we get e takes d5, c takes d5, and now the pawns is looking great for black. And now we get knight to g3. Now this knight is, you may judge it by, it is not really such a good knight because it cannot go to f5, but it can rear out his way to f4 and put even more pressure on the bishop on e6. Also keep in mind that white has got a slightly advantage here due to this pawn on d5 or also the pawn on a5. So we get rook a to e8, keeping that rook on f8 because maybe later on the f file will open and we will have the rook working from its original square. So we get pawn to c. Black could have played pawn to c5 to hit that dark square bishop, and after bishop to e3, then black can hold off his position with something like rook to a6 and rook to d6 and try to push and play for pawn to d4. But instead, in the game, black did not go c5 and played rook a to e8, and now we get pawn to f4 from white. We get queen to d2 first, and his idea is going to f4 because f4 is the best move in this position. And why is f4 is the best move in this position? Because white is threatening pawn to f5 to trap this light square bishop. f4 would have been a little bit nicer, but queen to d2 was the move which played in the game. We get c5 from black right now, and the bishop retreats back to e3. Maybe later on we could sacrifice on h6, who knows? Ding says no and played king to h7 to defend that sacrifice on h6. Also, there was an interesting line. Instead of king h7, black could have played bishop takes h3, sacrificing the bishop. The idea behind it that if you take as white, then after knight to e5 with this knight jumping to f3, it's such a tough position for white, and white needs to defend accurately because, for example, if the king moves on g2, then d4 check is going to be winning for black. And also at the same time, white's only move is king to f1, but after queen to d7, hitting the pawn on h3, the game is already being equal. And always, if the game is equal when you are down a piece, then there is something. It is so hard for the other side to play on with you. But instead of all of that, we get king to h7 played on the game. So we get rook a to e1, doubling up on the e file, because it is the only open file on the board. And now we get queen to c6 from black. Queen to c6 is just putting pressure on the pawn on a4. And now we get bishop to f4. Bishop to f4 was an inaccuracy. The engine really loved the idea behind to go pawn to b4, but it's unhuman. Probably an engine will play that all of the day, but it's such a hard move to play. But bishop to f4 was such a nice move because if black captures the pawn and he captured it on the game, then white can go knight to f5, and with this huge horse on f5, such a beautiful position for white. And as famous as Hikaru will say, a knight on f5 is worth at least a queen. So we get queen to c6 back from black, and right now the engine gives it as a blunder. And why it is a blunder? Because Fabiano played the best move and find it immediately, which is knight takes g7. Boom. Knight takes g7 is such a good sacrifice. Okay, you may think, okay, it's just a free piece. I will take it with my king and just chill. But after bishop takes h7 and king to h7, then bishop takes f8 was played, and again, Liren blunders with rook takes f8, because after rook takes f8, we will see what happens in the game shortly, but let me just show you why rook takes f8 was a blunder. Knight takes f8 was considered the best move because there is no penetration on g5 if black is trying to play queen to g5. Then after something like bishop to d7, maybe black can hold this game. It is not good for black. White is still probably winning, but it would have been better than taking out with the rook. And why taking out with the rook was bad? Because there is queen to g5, and right now you will get mated shortly, as this queen is entering the position with some queen to h5 checks, some rook takes e6 sacrifices, who knows. So we get rook to e8 back from Liren, to trying to defend against any sacrifices. And now we get pawn to c4 from Fabiano. Pawn to c4 was such a nice move, and why c4 exactly is such a good move? Because the idea if black tries to capture, that he is freeing up the square on e4 to go to h4 and just deliver a checkmate. It's so simple. But of course, Liren won't fall for that. Also, Liren could play pawn to d4, but it is still the same checkmating net with rook to e4. So after c4, Ding went rook to b8, trying to hope for any counterplay on the b file, but it is too late. Fabiano sacrifices the rook on e6, and immediately Ding resigns the game. And why he resigns the game? Because after f takes e6, then there is going to be queen to e7 with check. If you move your king to h8, then after rook takes e6, you will just get mated shortly with rook to h6 and queen to h7, and the whole position just collapses. And it is the same basically almost anywhere you go with the king. Rook takes e6 is going to be played. Also king to g6 Then there is really a nice idea with rook to e3 to try to slide the rook away, rook lift to do some rook lifting, and go rook to g3 and try to play for queen to g7 mate. Also, there is a really simpler win with rook takes e6, winning the black queen, and with the knight and the rook, they cannot hold a queen, especially with an open king chilling out on the middle of the board on g6. So that was the end of the game. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this recap. Make sure to see the previous rounds we just uploaded, and stay tuned for the rest of the nice games of the tournament. Goodbye.